Hello everyone, my name is Christopher Taylor and I'm with TV Toastmasters. My home group is Feedbackers in Beaverton, Oregon. I first joined Toastmasters for a couple reasons. I was nervous. I had trouble speaking in front of others. I needed some help. And when I joined Toastmasters, not knowing what to expect, I learned several things. One, it gave me the confidence to speak in front of others. I learned how to take constructive criticism. I benefited from that. That benefit was the confidence to get a job. When I took the suggestions in the club, when I started speaking in front of a group and remained speaking through my role, doing table topics, getting topics that you're unaware, learning how to think on your feet, learning how to speak on your feet. I first started working managing the Berkshire Hathaway account. I started as a back office role, not the face of the company. It didn't take long until I was dealing directly with the executives. Today I give executive briefings for Verizon Enterprise in the highest level in the enterprise space. And I'm grateful and I owe all of that to Toastmasters. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to another edition of The Right Stuff. I'm your host, Ken Coomes from TV Toastmasters. And it's my pleasure tonight to welcome to the show John Bronson, author of The Cold War Defense of the United States. Welcome, John. Glad you could make it.
Thank you for having me, Ken.
Truly my pleasure. I've read part of your book, but before we get into that, your book, The Cold War Defense of the United States, came out in May 2019. Why did you choose to write a book about the Cold War?
Well, one of the origins is that I did my own service in the 1970s. And so after that, I'd known for some time that at some point in time I would research it and just try to understand the larger context of it. And so I started doing that several years ago. This was long before I started to think about a book, but once I got into it, I realized there were quite a few books on specific aspects of it, and perhaps what might be needed was a book that would take multiple aspects and bring them into the same context, and that this would fill in the knowledge of a lot of people that served in that time. One of the things about the Cold War is that people that served tended to not know more than what they really specifically needed to do their job. And so I see a need that part of the reason for my wanting to learn, I think would be true for other people as well. They'd like to learn more than just what they personally did during that time.
So a lot of years of research, and then somewhere along the way, the decision to write the book. Wrote the book for, did you have a particular audience in mind when you wrote the book?
Yeah, I thought about just history buffs and military buffs and the veterans themselves. And again, people that served didn't necessarily know very much, and so I'm hoping that the book could fill in gaps for people that, focused in one particular area during that time.
Makes sense, history buffs. The Cold War is behind us now, we think. We don't know perhaps, right? So you did this research for years, found out things you didn't know, but were there surprises, something you found out that was counter to what you believed before that?
I don't know about what I believed before that, but the surprises for me were just the breadth and the extent of the number of things we needed and just the number of things that were needed to deploy all this across a large country like the United States. What I describe in the book generally started with President Truman in the 1940s. One of the things I learned, which was a surprise, is that between the 1940s and roughly 1990, 9 presidents and all the Congresses during that time kept in place these priorities that really had been established during the Truman times. And that surprises me, particularly in the context of our present political environment where, we see a subsequent president really trying to undo something that a prior president did. And that was not the case during this time in the Cold War.
And in addition to the trying to undo what a predecessor had done, we see a lot of tension between parties, the House, the Senate, the President. So there was a lot of cooperation during that extensive period of time, apparently.
There was quite a bit. In the early part of the Cold War, we didn't really know what to do, and one thing that both the military leaders but also the political leaders did is we relied on our industrial and our scientific communities to to really study and then advise the government on what was the correct course of action during this time. And that happened numerous times, and I try to bring that into the book.
So the establishment, perhaps, not only of the Cold War, but of a large military-industrial complex, would you say?
Yes, and I would say so, and that's one of the things that Eisenhower commented on, is he was actually, although he saw the need that we build these forces up and be capable, he was also, particularly at the end of his presidency, he was very much against the industrial military complex, as he called it.
Thought it perhaps had outgrown its usefulness, or was just too large in general, or?
Probably that it was not only focused on what we absolutely needed, but it became self-serving over time.
I've read a good portion of your book. There's an awful lot of detail in there, which was well done, I believe. I think there were close to 2 or 3 dozen maps altogether. And of course, a lot of those maps are about installations or sites or places that aren't there today. I wonder about the European portion of the maps and the geopolitical changes. Are those maps a good look at history to compare to today's maps, or are they still similar somewhat?
They're quite similar. The European boundaries haven't changed too much. Primarily what the maps of Europe depict is some of the elements, similar defensive elements during World War II that were applied by England and Germany. It's used to illustrate really the problem and how we got started. And then because the Cold War started so soon after World War II ended, that I thought that depicting the methods and the equipment at the close of World War II, it's just not very long until we started to grow a capability that we now call the Cold War.
So not long after World War II, so that transition, do you have any idea from your research or from what's in your book that I perhaps haven't gotten to yet as to what drove that decision or set of decisions that we were needing to do more?
Well, fairly soon after World War II ended, of course, the end of World War II, we had massive forces in Europe. Britain had forces, Canada had forces. All of those basically went home at the conclusion of the war, with the exception of units that were specifically called out as an occupation army. That's not true on the other side of what we now call the Iron Curtain. The Soviet units stayed in those Central European countries after the war, and very quickly after the war we started to develop the opinion that they likely wanted to do further conquest in Europe to both reduce risk to themselves, but also just to bring more of the countries of the world under a communist government.
So with a different ideology, our friends during the war, the Soviet Union, now were something to be concerned about, apparently.
Right, and perhaps their attitude was that although we had been allies during the war, we were now potentially the adversary. And that's the origin of the Cold War, really.
And, as your book title indicates, the defense of the United States during the Cold War.
Right, and that's really the first thing we did, is we undertook to establish a defense of the continental United States, because the assumption at the time was that if the Soviet Union had attacked Western Europe, we would once again have to be the supplier of a large war. We'd have to have our industrial capacity to do that. We'd have to use the shipping lanes again to move both men and equipment to Europe to support the war that would get started.
So it was a large undertaking, and it was defense of the U.S., but it was preparation to be involved in world affairs beyond our borders again,
if that became necessary. Yes, that was exactly what it was.
Well, the Cold War's hopefully behind us now, and excellent book about the Cold War. Would you say there are any lessons we learned from the Cold War and everything that entailed that apply today?
Well, what I think is that preparation is almost always good. I think that's one of the big things we learned. At the start of World War II, we were not prepared. And so in the very early stages of that war, we had to catch up first before, and when I say catch up, I mean catch up with the preparations that Germany and Japan, they were already ready to go to war. We were not. So we had to do this catch up.
So we started out behind the curve. And maybe that's part of the reason the military-industrial complex grew so rapidly and so extensively, would you say?
Yes, I think that's true. We had to learn to do some things that, in fact, we hadn't done very much of in the Second World War. And so what we did is we actually, in multiple cases, both the Air Force and the Navy and the government as a whole, relied on our industrial strength and our scientific community to study the situation and then advise the government on what would be the proper equipment to build and the proper way to use forces should it come to that.
I remember, like you, I served in the 70s, and I served in the tail end of the Cold War, let's say. I remember as a child, things that at the time didn't impact me the same as they do now that I reflect back on them. Did you have neighbors who built bomb shelters, for example?
No, I didn't. I grew up in small towns, and so I've heard these stories, but I didn't do that. I didn't experience any of that personally. One of the things is, as a very young person, we lived on the Oregon coast, and at one point, one weekend, our parents drove us out to the Mount Hebo radar station, which is on Mount Hebo. I think they took us there to show us the snow, but in fact, what I'm left with is the recollection that there was this radar site along the coastline, and it was, it was part of our defense and I didn't really understand all that at the time, but that's what I remember of it.
Ah. Did you know it was a radar site at that time?
They told me it was a radar site. I
Okay.
didn't really know what that meant, but yeah, they told us that. So
Mount Hebo. So that's on the Oregon coast. Is that still there today, that radar site?
The radar site is not. It discontinued probably about 1990, but the site's still there, so you can drive up there and see where it was.
Are there any historical references up there to what happened during the Cold War, or how we were involved in Oregon?
I don't recall any. It's
been a while.
It's been a while, but also it's a communication site. It's been a communication site, just a telephone communication site for some time. That's about it. They've scrubbed it pretty clean.
Good to know. John, I want to talk some more with you, but we're going to take a short break now. Thank you for watching. We'll be back shortly.
Hi, I'm Eric Bergman. As a member of TV Toastmasters, I get to learn all about video production, running a TV show. Plus, I get to be on camera interviewing really fascinating Toastmasters who share their stories about their hobbies, their activities, and how they benefit our community. I also get to bring in members of my home Toastmasters club. We toasted in Lake Oswego. They get to tell their stories and build their communication skills. We're bringing a voice for District 7 Toastmasters here in Oregon and Southwest Washington to a TV audience. And TV Toastmasters is a great way to learn how to spread your message and share your stories with a wider audience.
Welcome back to The Right Stuff, part of TV Toastmasters. I'm Ken Coomes, your host, talking tonight with John Bronson, author of The Cold War Defense of the United States. Okay, John, we've talked a little bit about that. We started into personal history. So I remember, as a kid, we actually had a door-to-door salesman come around the neighborhood selling bomb shelters. My parents didn't get one. I don't know why. I didn't care at the time. Didn't ask them since. But we had neighbors that actually had bomb shelters put in. And I just wonder what else there was about that time that maybe I wasn't aware of as a child. And of course, we're of a similar age, but do you have any recollections of something of that time frame that was kind of different?
I don't have any experiences like that, again, because I grew up in small towns and we didn't really do that. What I do know is that it wasn't uncommon for young men to, after high school, to leave and go do their service. And so I do remember that, and I think that did affect me because I think I grew up with the idea that I need to do that at some point, and I did, in fact. The only other real standout image from the small towns is I remember that what I now know to be fighter interceptor aircrafts flew over very low one Saturday morning, and I've always remembered that. I didn't really know what it meant at the time.
Just kind of cool. There goes an airplane.
Kind of. There's some airplanes, and why are they so low? Hadn't seen that before, but I do recall it.
I don't think we had that where I grew up in the Midwest. So even though you say a small town in Oregon, that was something we didn't experience in the Midwest during that time frame. So now I know that you've had some people have read your manuscript or read your book, and some people have talked to you about it during the writing and development, and perhaps during your research even you've talked to people. Have you had any reactions that surprised you?
Probably the reaction that surprised me most was from people younger than myself, and when they learned what the book was about, they expressed an interest in reading it because they wanted to know what primarily their fathers had done during that time. And so I heard comments like, well, I think my father was involved in something like that, or I think, in one case, I heard a story that the person's father had worked at one of the large aerospace companies for a long time, and the comment was, I bet he worked on things like that, but I don't know. And so I think, and this is one of my goals behind reading the book or writing the book, in fact, to fill in my own knowledge, but also the intention is to very likely fill in the knowledge of some of these other people that don't know tremendous detail about what their family members were doing during that time.
I know my biological father was a Marine in World War II, but he never talked about what he did. My stepdad went to Korea. He never talked about what he did except one time, and that was enough for me because it was a pretty harrowing and graphic tale he had to tell. How about your folks? Did they talk about what they did? Is it also something where maybe they'll find out now or you'll find out now?
Well, the details of my family are they didn't serve, and it really has to do with the age difference. And so that's one of the things I learned as well, is that my father didn't do military service, and that's what I know about that.
So there were nothing for you to find out about what he did during the Cold War then, or did he serve in a different way?
Well, he was actually a minister, and so he was actually not to go overseas. He was actually to stay in this country to support the people at home.
Okay. Well, we should thank him for that service. That's an important service as well. So he probably talked about what he did. It wasn't a big secret.
Wasn't a big secret what he did, but that is certainly part of the Cold War, is that most people didn't know much more than what they specifically needed to know.
And when we talked before, I think we've talked about the fact that it wasn't just, I'm stationed here, I don't know what the people stationed over here are doing. It was, I'm stationed here, and I don't know what other people on my base are doing. Isn't that right?
That's certainly my experience. I was in a place that doesn't exist anymore called West Berlin, and area that I'd walk nearby every day virtually. I had no idea what they did in that building. From all my research, I now have an idea, but I'll never actually know because they don't talk about it.
If they told you, they'd have to shoot you.
Or something, yeah.
Well, McFarland published your book in a day when a lot of people go the self-published route. What was most gratifying about having them publish instead of doing it yourself?
I think the main thing is that by their wanting to publish the book, that has left me to focus on the text and the graphics. And I let them worry about things like the fonts and the page size and the page layout, and that's exactly what they did. But the other thing about it is I'm not unmindful that their primary goal in the thing is to sell books, and that's fine with me, of course. But the other thing that's true is I did not have to recruit and in fact hire the people that actually crafted the book, the people that do the page layout and the cover graphics and those elements. I didn't have to, I reviewed and commented, but I didn't have to locate the people to actually do it and then actually make those hard decisions myself.
So you could focus on research and writing.
I could focus on the content and work on that. So,
are you planning to publish something else relating perhaps to the defense of the other part of the world or the defense of the U.S. today?
I'm actually working on one. I don't know if I'm ready to say it's going to come out, but this book is really about what happened in the continental United States to defend, from a possible attack. Another book would probably cover what we did as a country in other parts of the world to either be ready for an attack or to assist other nations as well.
Did the assist in your research so far, either from the book that's out now or the book you're thinking about that you're not committing to yet, have you learned that they helped us as well, or was it more one-sided? We had the big ability to assist.
We certainly assisted. Generally, what our overall strategy was in cases where it was needed, we would help them grow their capabilities well. That was very much, and that philosophy came out of an important study that was done under the time of Truman. President Truman initiated a study to look into that, and what it was we would assist other countries to develop their own defenses and be prepared for that possible Soviet attack. And that's really what we did for 45 years or so.
And that was not just altruism, because helping them would help us as well in that same potential confrontation, would it not?
It absolutely would.
So, do you plan on writing totally different, something else, like a romance novel or whatever?
I don't have any vision of that right now.
Nope. So no plans to write something else yet, just maybe, and you're looking into some possibilities. Too early to commit.
Yeah, it doesn't exist yet, but I have started working on a second book about the Cold War, and it would be centered around other parts of the world, and it would rely on the existence of this first book as a kind of a foundation for what we did elsewhere.
So you mentioned earlier that it took you years, so you did a lot of research over the years. What were your sources, or what would you recommend other people, if they're interested in, to go find out more?
Well, one of the things I've done, of course, is included the extensive bibliography in this book, and one of the things I've found in my own reading, and is very true in this project as well, is I rely on the bibliographies from other books that I read, and so there are several pages of bibliography. It's very detailed. What you find in that bibliography is there's quite a few government documents, reports, different kind of different studies, different estimates, but also there's historical documents, and normally those are from the service branches that they've put down, what we did during that time. So you have reference material that you can search through to see what types of units were on what base, and you mentioned the maps earlier. That's how I constructed the maps, is digging through those government documents, and at a particular point in time, what were the various units spread around the country. Of course, it's a large country, so there's quite a few units, and that's why the maps are there, to bring that into that perspective.
I did notice that, of course, a lot of areas got more attention in defense than the entire United States because of where we expected a threat to be from. Of course, you can meet and hear more from John at the Evergreen Air and Space Museum, where he gives talks every month, is it?
I would say not quite every week.
Oh, wow.
I'm on the schedule almost every week at Evergreen.
Wow, frequently. And if they want to get in contact with you to know more, rather than go there, is there a way to reach you or to find out more from you directly?
I would say search for the Facebook page.
Okay. Thank you again, John, for sharing your book.
Well, thank
your
you for having
knowledge,
me, Ken.
Your research with us. And thank you for watching once again. This is Ken Coomes for The Right Stuff, part of TV Toastmasters. And we've been talking with John Bronson, author of The Cold War Defense of the United States. I'm not going to tell you to have a great day. Instead, I'm going to tell you, go out and make it a great week.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Harmon. I'm a member of TV Toastmasters. In this club, we have an opportunity to practice speaking before the camera as well as running the equipment room. If you're interested in being interviewed on TV Toastmasters or becoming a member, please go to toastmasters.org and look for us, or simply search for TV Toastmasters on the web.